One of the things that I have said for years now is that gay activism will overplay its hand, that the bullying will backfire, or the extreme nature of the agenda will backfire. Whereas most Americans want to be tolerant, fair, we don't want to be guilty of discrimination against any group of people. To the extent Americans believe that gay is the new black or transgender is the new black, or they have a family member or friend that identifies as LGBT, they want to be accepting and positive, but it never stops there. Things keep going further and further, because of which there are backlashes, and I believe that on a societal level we'll continue to see these backlashes. Something very important has taken place, another major case that we need to discuss, and I'm joined now by Erik Stanley. Erik is Senior Counsel, Director of the Center for Christian Ministries with the Alliance Defending Freedom, with whom we work closely. Erik, welcome again to the broadcast. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you.
So, Erik, what's this latest case that should have the attention of the whole nation, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we had filed a lawsuit on behalf of 4 churches in Massachusetts because last year the Massachusetts legislature changed its non-discrimination law to add gender identity as a protected class into its law. And it tasked the Attorney General and the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination with coming up with guidance to interpret and enforce that law. And both the Attorney General and the Commission came out with the guidance that said that churches were considered places of public accommodation, and therefore they could not discriminate in their facility uses on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And so we filed a lawsuit to protect the right of pastors and churches to freely operate consistent with their faith. And we're happy to report that shortly after we filed the lawsuit, the state backed down, clarified that it could not intrude upon the First Amendment rights of churches, and the lawsuit's been resolved.
All right, so before we celebrate the victory here, let's first understand exactly what happened. Were they saying in a Sunday morning church service that the church had to change its standards or values, or let's just say the church was having a dinner of some kind or hosting some community event, that in those situations it would have to go by the state standards?
Well, there was some confusion on that point, even between the Attorney General and the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. The Commission said that, and this is a quote from their guidance, they said even a church could be seen as a place of public accommodation if it holds a secular event, such as a spaghetti supper, that is open to the public. But the Attorney General simply put onto her website that churches, in general, were subject to the new gender identity law. And so there certainly was some disagreement and confusion, but I think at base what was going on is the state of Massachusetts was attempting to come into the church facilities and regulate how the church could use its building and really say that you could not discriminate in the use of your building facilities, in your restrooms, in your changing areas, your private areas, your locker rooms, on the basis of gender identity. And so that's really what they were after.
All right, so then specifically, what this would mean is if a clearly biological male walked into a church building, be it for some community event that was being hosted or be it for a Sunday morning service, and the man is wearing a dress but is clearly a biological male, and he then goes to walk into the ladies' restroom during the service with other women and girls in there, and an usher said, "Sir, I'm sorry, this is for women only," that according to this proposed law, that would have been discrimination.
Well, that's right, and it goes even further than that because under the rules or under the law, it was passed by the Massachusetts legislature. Gender identity is defined as one's perception of one's own gender, and so it doesn't even have to be someone who dresses like the opposite gender or acts like the opposite gender. It could be a biological man who acts and dresses and looks like a biological man, but just perceives himself to be a woman on a particular day, could use a restroom or a changing area. And then what's even worse about the law is that it would, if the church were found to be discriminating, it could be fined thousands of dollars, and it carried a penalty of up to a year in jail for every instance of discrimination. So this was clearly a very over-the-top attempt that had a lot of teeth to it to subject churches to this new law.
All right, you can't put a church in jail or a building in jail. You can't put the whole congregation in jail. Who would have gone to jail?
Well, it probably would have been the governing authorities of the church, either the pastor or the elder board or deacon board, whoever was in charge of the church. That was one of the options that the state had, was to enforce this through criminal sanctions.
And if you had some heterosexual predator, we know there are tragically way too many such people out there, and this person is looking for a way to get at, say, he's a male heterosexual predator, and he's looking for a way to he's a voyeur, he's looking for a way to look at women in some state of undress, or just be near them in that state, or maybe look at little girls in vulnerable situations. And this person came into the building, same deal, just says, I'm a woman, identify as a woman. That there actually be no way that the church could stop that person.
Well, under the law, I think that's exactly right, because the church would, if they stopped a person like that, would be subject to a potential discrimination claim that, again, could include fines or criminal penalties. And I think that's certainly bad enough, and that's a very, very valid and large concern about these laws, is that they do open up these areas to potential predators. But even a bigger kind of constitutional issue with this is just the complete and utter disregard that the state of Massachusetts showed for the fact that church facilities are not just like any other business, that everything that a church does in and through its facilities is a part of its religious beliefs. It speaks to the community about what the church believes and how they want to be perceived in the community. And so for the government to come and to force a church to use its facilities in ways that violate its faith is a blatant intrusion on the constitutional rights of the church.
Now, is there or has there been any ambiguity over the decades with the government's overreach? In other words, is this something that our courts have wrestled with for decades and our founders were unclear about? Or is this one of these egregious overreaches that everyone has to shout and say, what are you doing?
Yeah. This is definitely one of those egregious oversights. This is the protections for the free exercise of religion and the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment were put there to be very clear that there was a sphere of authority and of autonomy that the government cannot intrude upon. And that's the realm of the church, that in the internal workings of the church, and the Supreme Court's been clear about this going back to the early 1800s in case after case after case, that there is, when it comes to the internal affairs of the church, how a church structures itself, how it does its business, how it exercises its religion, how it uses the different things that it uses for those religious purposes, buildings and offices and things of that nature, that the government simply cannot intrude upon that. And if they do, it violates the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. So this is very clear. It's been very clear for just literally dozens and dozens of years through dozens of cases. And what Massachusetts did here was an egregious overstep. And I think our lawsuit actually caused them to understand that, because they started to run very quickly after we filed the lawsuit, and in fact actually sent us a letter, the Attorney General did, shortly after the lawsuit was filed, that said that unqualified references to houses of worship was inconsistent with the First Amendment right of churches, and your lawsuit caused us to focus on these issues and to make a revision to their website to remove churches as places of public accommodations.
The scary thing is, though, if churches had not said stop, and other conservative organizations standing for religious liberty had not said stop, and then the ADF got actively involved, this could have actually happened. And it would really be no different. In fact, it would be far worse than, but no different theoretically, than a church that said, we don't ordain women to be pastors. And the state says, unless you do, you're going to be fined and spend a year in jail. I mean, it would be that much of an overreach. Hey, Eric, I've got one more question. You can just stay on the other side of the break. and it has to do with if you are seeing any type of change in the courts, in the cases you're dealing with, any type of change in sentiments as LGBT activists continue to be guilty of overreach and pushing in a way that is plainly going too far. I wonder if you're seeing any kind of backlash in the courts or positive results in the cases. I'm speaking with Erik Stanley, working with the Alliance Defending Freedom. They have been on the front lines of standing for righteousness, standing for morality and culture, standing for religious freedoms for several decades now, but under ever-increasing pressure as the society has lost, or American society has lost many of its important bearings. Erik, there's been tremendous momentum on the side of gay activism for some years now. Obviously, something positive is that the church has had to reevaluate its outreach to the gay and lesbian community and asked, are we treating everyone with compassion and seeking to invite everyone to hear the gospel and receive? Are we demonizing people? And, there obviously positive things have happened, but overwhelmingly there's been a negative trend in the society, culminating last year in the Supreme Court redefining marriage and the Obama administration now in America. We see what's happening in the military and on and on. And sometimes it can be discouraging to be standing for what's right. You were involved in the Supreme Court case and to see losses there. Are you seeing any changes? Have gay activists overplayed their hand, say, with bullying? Is there more sympathy in America for people who've lost their businesses and for others that are being singled out for their views? Or perhaps the push of transgender activism and the Obama administration telling schools you're going to be punished unless you allow a 15-year-old boy to share a locker room and shower stall with a 15-year-old girl. Are you seeing this, any positive pushback?
Well, I think we are. You mentioned a couple of instances where that's the case. I think we're seeing some positive pushback in the Obama administration's attempt to redefine the word sex to include gender identity and to force public schools to open their restrooms and locker rooms to members of the opposite sex. I think that's an issue where they've overplayed their hand, where it affects the privacy and the safety of women and young girls. And I think we're seeing a backlash as a result of that. In fact, we're involved in a number of lawsuits on that issue where families have been filing lawsuits against the Obama administration to protect the privacy and safety of their young women in these sensitive areas. We're also starting to hopefully see some sympathy given to business owners who just want to exercise their faith and just want to do that in the context of their business, to not have to be forced to participate in creative expression and in ceremonies that violate their faith. I think that it remains to be seen how all of this is still going to play out in the culture and in the courts. And I think specifically in the courts, these battles will continue to be fought for the next decade or so until we come to some understanding of what this is going to look like. But I think that our case in Massachusetts stands for at least the proposition that when we stand together and when we push back and when we show up, we can win, and we do win. Mm-hmm. And I think in these cases where the government or activists have overplayed their hand, as they did in Massachusetts, then when we do stand and we file these lawsuits, we can and do win. And we've been blessed by God's grace to see a great level of success in the kinds of cases that we're bringing, and in the understanding in the courts that freedom is still worth protecting.
Yeah, haven't you seen a string of great victories over the years on college campuses having to do with restriction of freedom of speech?
Oh, absolutely. The college campuses have tried for years to get away with speech zones and codes and discrimination codes and those kinds of things. And every time that we've set up one of these codes in a lawsuit, it's been knocked down as unconstitutional. We've seen a great string of success there. So I think that's fertile ground there. I think the business owners, the creative professionals, that's going to be fertile ground for protection, for victory in the future as we protect the rights of conscience of people of faith to live and act according to their beliefs. And I think in the church and in religious organizations, there's still a willingness to understand and accept that the First Amendment does protect the right of churches to live and to act freely in accordance with their faith.
So do you think, and we'll be done here in just a couple of minutes, and thanks so much for your time today, that if Christian pastors, leaders, on a regular basis, on an annual basis, educated their people on these issues, and Christian parents got involved in schools, do you think something that simple could help spark a national moral and cultural revolution?
Well, I certainly hope and pray that that's the case. I do know that we are living in a day where we are simply living as Christians in our churches, in our businesses, in our communities, proclaiming the gospel, living it out in our daily lives. Simply doing those acts as Christians comes into conflict with the culture and the prevailing norms of the day. And so whether people get involved or not may not even be an option. It may be that they have to get involved in order to preserve our freedoms. But I think that we have to learn these lessons that ADF has been able to learn by God's grace over the years that we've been filing these cases, is that when we stand together and we push back, we can and we do win by God's grace. We're blessed to have over an 85% success rate in the cases we file, which is pretty amazing considering the cutting-edge issues that we deal with. But that just goes to show how much can be accomplished when people do become informed, become engaged, and then stand for truth.
Absolutely. And that's a staggering statistic. I've often spoken with one of your colleagues, Joe Franco, a longtime friend for decades back, and he talked to me about the successes on campuses and then different cases and some of the challenges. But 85% success rate, when you're really in the thick of some of the most difficult cultural issues, and we're constantly being told the culture wars are over, just capitulate and roll over. And to me, you know what that sounds like? It's like trash talk between two boxers before a fight. You don't even want to get in the ring with me, man. You're going to get knocked out. You just smile at the bravado and go and do your job. So thank you, sir, for what you're doing and for this great victory in Massachusetts. May it be a lesson for the whole nation.
Amen. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be with you today.